Hi there, and welcome back to our Starsector pirate campaign. So at the end of the last episode, we captured a conquest and a Falcon, and then made our way back here to Umbra. What I want to do now is to put some weapons on this conquest so that we can use it going forward. In order to do that, I've stripped some of the weapons off of our other ships, just to make sure that we have enough in order to fully equip our new capital ship. Thankfully, the last battle also provided us with some large ballistic weapons, which we'll be able to put to good use now. As you can see, I'm building this conquest asymmetrically, with the entire offensive complement focused on the left side. And that consists of a Gauss cannon, autocannon, heavy molar, and hypervelocity driver. Meanwhile, the right side just has two dual flak cannons for point defense purposes. And we're going to leave the large missile mounts on the front empty for now, as we don't have anything appropriate to put in them. For the energy mounts, we're going to put burst point defense lasers in each of the four corners, and then just an assortment of graviton beams, tactical lasers, and long-range point defense lasers everywhere else. None of this is particularly ideal, but it's what we have in our inventory at the moment. For hull mods, we're going to build in heavy armor and hardened shields, as those are the most expensive points-wise. We're also going to add dedicated targeting core for the increased range, and we'll be looking to exchange that for integrated targeting once we find it. I also want to avoid any situations where the ship might lose engine control. Unfortunately, we don't have resistant flux conduits at the moment, so insulated engine assembly will have to do for now. This conquest also came with the faulty power grid demod, so I'm going to add flux distributor and stabilized shields to mitigate any potential flux issues. Finally, I'm going to put any remaining points into vents and then capacitors. We have a few points left over, so I'm just going to add harpoon missiles to the offensive side, just so they don't go to waste. And that's the conquest fully equipped. It's certainly not optimal, but it's not bad considering what we have to work with. For the Falcon, we're basically stuck with whatever's left over, and that consists of an autocannon and mortar on the front, graviton beams in the middle, and point defense lasers in the rear. For hull mods, we're of course going to add safety overrides, as that's basically cocaine to me at this point, and then we're going to build in hardened shields and add hardened subsystems as well. The rest of the points will go towards a little bit of vents and some capacitors. And finally the Enforcer, which is one of the ships that got stripped down for weapons to put on the Conquest. So ultimately the build for this ship didn't change a whole lot. We lost some of the medium ballistic weapons that were in the front three slots. Those are now just heavy mortars and a needler. And the ordnance points that we gained from that exchange went towards more hammers and a rocket pod. And at long last, we have some friends as well. So this is a new feature in version 0.95 where occasionally after a battle you'll have an opportunity to promote someone from within the ranks of the crew to an officer position in exchange for one story point. And we're going to spend another story point to do something else that's new in version 0.95, which is to mentor this officer. And what that does is it allows this officer to level up twice as fast and gives us a wider selection of skills to choose from at each level up. Personally, I don't think the experience bonus alone is worthwhile, as regular officers are now capped at level 5, and that's easily attainable after just a few large fleet battles. But the increased selection of skills to choose from is definitely of interest, as I always find it to be a shame when I get an officer that doesn't have compatible skills. With all that out of the way, what I want to do now is head back to Galatia Academy. The reason being, I want to make some progress on the main story quests. I have heard reports from within the community that because Nexerelin allows the capture of planets belonging to the major factions within the core worlds, some of these story quests can be broken if story-critical planets are taken over by other factions. Since taking over core world colonies is something that I would like to get to in the not-too-distant future, I'd like to get through these story quests that rely on those planets as early as possible so that we don't cause any hiccups. But while I've been blabbing on, this wonderful hegemony trade fleet has basically fallen right at our feet, and we could certainly use the funds right now, so let's engage. As usual, I'm going to head in first with the Hammerhead. Even though we have the conquest now, this fleet is still considerably larger than us, so I'd like to shave down their numerical advantage, if at all possible. I think this may also be the first battle in which these capture points have appeared. For those of you who don't know, taking these points will increase the maximum deployment points you have for the battle. And they usually also confer some additional effect, such as increasing your range, speed, or the rate at which your command points regenerate. That won't help us directly here, as we have no hope of holding all the points with just one ship. However, the AI is known for dividing up its fleet in order to capture as many of these points as possible. So lingering around these points will occasionally give us an opportunity to pick off individual ships as they stray away from the pack. We just need to be careful, as any ships that have already finished capturing the points they were assigned to will try to quickly reinforce their friends. I'm actually going to drop my shields for a bit here and just take some of these hits, as the autocannons on this Hammerhead aren't particularly damaging to armor, and I may need that flux capacity later on to tank something more deadly. These Khopesh bombers are actually pretty deadly if they can hit, but fortunately their missiles are quite slow and only travel in a straight line. Again, I'm going to drop shields and just tank some of these hits. Though in this case it probably wasn't necessary. It can be a bit hard to tell sometimes, but usually better to be safe than sorry. You never know when you might need that little bit of extra flux. These hounds are going to be annoying as they're pretty fast, so the only way I'm going to be able to lock them into an engagement is if they come to me. And meanwhile, we definitely don't want to take any rockets to our engines. Unfortunately, the Mora carrier those bombers are deploying from is a bit too tanky of a target for us to take on ourselves while there's still so many distractions on the field. On the bright side, this hound has volunteered as tribute. And not to be left out, this other hound has volunteered as well. I guess he really couldn't live without his buddy. How romantic. Let's see if this kite will follow their lead and try to kamikaze as well. The answer was yes, and we are 3 for 3 on assisted suicides. So a good teaching point there. That was not a good time to vent. This Hammerhead is pretty similarly equipped to the first one that we faced. Let's see if we can chase him off as well. Hey, stay out of this, monitor. This is a private matter. Okay, we've definitely gotten ourselves into a bit of a pickle here. I'm gonna have to selectively turn my shields off so we can save our flux for when we really need it. Alright, crisis averted, I think. And we've run out of peak performance time, so let's get out of here. Just gonna quickly check how far we are from the edge of the map. These solo engagements are much safer if you have a way to retreat quickly. We're not in any real danger at this point, but I'd like to minimize our CR loss in case we need the extra time. Okay, so we managed to thin the herd a little bit there. It's not as much as I would have liked, but things did get a bit hairy, and I don't want to risk another solo engagement. So at this point, I'm comfortable just sending in the fleet. With the Conquest and Falcon now in the mix, I think I'll let both of those larger ships be anchors for the rest of our fleet. So we'll send a small ship to take each of the 2 side capture points. And then the Conquest and Falcon can each get a monitor and maybe a destroyer as well. And I'll still have the Omen on me. Even though the capture points did appear in this battle, I still don't think they're going to be much of a factor. We've already sent out all of our combat-capable ships, and we still have some points left over. The enemy fleet may be a little bit limited, but they're almost certainly going to reach that northernmost capture point before we do. And that's going to give them enough points to send out anything they haven't already. It looks like there's an enforcer going for that western capture point. Let's see if we can take it out before it can regroup. Hey buddy, you got a little something on your face there. Here, let me take care of that for you. There you go, all better. It looks like everything's just sort of clumped up in the middle right now. Let's have everyone fly a bit to the west. At least then we won't have so far to fly ourselves. I'm also just realizing now that it's been quite a while since we looked at the weapons on our Wayfarer. Unfortunately, I think we're also rapidly approaching the point where it would be better to simply retire that ship. It's been a capable enough ship in the time that we've had it, but I think we have access to much better options now. And I'm hearing the very distinctive sound of sabos being launched, but they seem to be targeted elsewhere, so I think we have some time to mess up this backline. Alright, it looks like I've drawn the ire of most of these cruisers, so I may be a bit hamstrung in terms of what I'm able to accomplish on my own. But hopefully that creates an opening for the rest of our fleet to do something useful. So let's assign them to some nearby targets. And it looks like the Centurion wants to engage. I don't expect to get much done here, but maybe we can get him to bugger off. This pack of cruisers looks like it's going to be a tough nut to crack, so it may be wiser for us to disengage, pick off the easier targets, and come back once we have the rest of the fleet together, which currently looks like it's still occupied with chasing that Hammerhead. Come on guys, are you nearly done? I say as I fly around in my own Hammerhead that refuses to die. Alright, finally. Come on then, we have business to attend to. Actually, you know what? Just go for that Griffin. We can keep the rest of them occupied. The graviton beams on this eagle are annoying, but we can just take it to the face if we need to vent some flux. I'm not in a great position to deal with this eagle at the moment, but if we can keep his attention, then hopefully that'll create a window for the rest of our fleet to get something done. Or, you know, we could just do it ourselves. And look at our Omen back there, just eating up all sorts of fire that's meant for us. What a team player. Alright, let's finish these guys off. I've had just about enough of their nonsense. Okay, we don't need to hold those points anymore. Let's get everyone in this fight. Again, just gonna face tank these graviton beams for a bit because we can. Did you see that sneaky bomber? He tried to surprise us by flying through that explosion. Smart move, but also dumb. And now we finally have an intimate moment to spend with this Centurion. He's been trying to keep his walls up, but I knew we'd get through to him eventually. Look at this poor Mora. Getting so much love it doesn't know what to do with all of it. Are we done? Okay, apparently not. Let's follow the pack and see who they're tracking down. I mean, I know we can end the fight right now, but if we have a reasonable chance of actually chasing something down here, then we might as well take it. Oh, it's a monitor, still locked in mortal combat with our little wayfarer. It's hard to imagine that just 5 episodes ago, this little skirmish over here was basically the scale of combat that we're dealing with. The pace with which our fleet has grown has been quite remarkable, even compared to my own personal Starsector campaigns. One of the most surprising aspects to me that, in hindsight, probably should have been quite obvious, is that having the flexibility to attack basically anyone right off the bat means that a lot of the limitations that I normally experience are just gone. What I mean is, if I begin with the mindset of trying to maintain good relations with all of the major factions, then my list of available targets from the start of the game is basically limited to pirates, pathers, independents, and bounties. And because the fleets from those factions scale completely differently from the major faction fleets, I often don't find the first capital ship until maybe a year into the campaign, and if I'm particularly unlucky, it can be even much longer than that. With that said, I am curious if the consequences of all this looting is eventually going to catch up to us. With Nexerelin, if you cause enough trouble for a faction, they will eventually start sending fleets specifically to hunt you down. That hasn't happened yet, but at the pace we've been going, I do expect that to happen pretty soon. Okay, so there's still a Dominator and a Hammerhead in play, but I don't feel too threatened by them. And that Atlas alone probably has enough cargo to fill up our holds, so I don't think we need to take this too seriously. I'll just send out a small contingent, and we'll take out what we can and let the rest go. And if you're not too interested in watching this pursuit, I completely understand. I'll put a timestamp in the description and in the comments for you to skip to the end. For those of you still here, I was pleasantly surprised to find that there was some healthy debate around my decision to sell the Legion several episodes back. And I wanted to reiterate that I'm very much in agreement with many of the points that were made. To elaborate, I think it's entirely possible for both the Legion and the Conquest to be good battleships in specific roles. And like many things in life, there's no need to frame it as a zero-sum game, where supporting one side would be antithetical to supporting the other. So if I do something that you guys feel like could be approached in a better way, don't be shy about pointing it out. I fully acknowledge that even though I have been playing this game for a number of years, I still find myself learning new things fairly regularly. And that most often comes from interactions with players who have had somewhat different experiences with Starsector, either through a preference for a different playstyle, or by use of different mods. And while we're talking about comments, I wanted to give a shout out to Filthy Incognito for leaving a lovely long-form explanation of their experience playing Starsector. It seems like we have many of the same goals in mind in a typical playthrough, and go about accomplishing them in a somewhat similar order. And separately from that, I also wanted to thank each and every one of you who has been watching and engaging with the videos so far. I have received some questions as to whether this is a new channel, and the answer to that is actually no. Though this channel has existed for many years, its first video was actually on a mobile game that was briefly popular about 6 or 7 years ago. It was a small indie clone of the game Clash of Clans, which at that time was enjoying enormous success and inspired a great number of copycats. The game, called Tiny Realms, was one that I had been keeping an eye on for some time, and I even created a new Apple Play account in order to get into their soft launch, which was region restricted to Canada for several months. Owing in large part to my early participation, I was even briefly the #1 ranked player in that game, and I received a number of inquiries about sharing gameplay tips and tricks with new players. As a consequence of that, I made a short series of videos detailing my experiences with the game, and explaining the various things that I had learned along the way. Unfortunately, like many of the Clash of Clans clones that were made, it never achieved mainstream success, and I actually ended up quitting the game not long after the video series was completed. Of course, I have since taken down those videos to focus this channel specifically on Starsector, so there's the story about how this channel first came to be. But I'm sure that if you look closely enough, you'll still be able to find vestiges of my time playing and making videos about Tiny Realms. And with that, I think we're done here. I mean, unless of course this wolf wants to be incredibly annoying and refuse to surrender. That being the case, maybe we have time for one more short story. So about 2 years ago, I created 2 more videos, also since removed, on an entirely different game called Cataclysm: Dark Days Ahead. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's a fairly well-regarded roguelike game that's still in active development. And I had these grand ambitions about creating a role-playing series with an intricate story and interesting characters. I even got some people I knew to voice some of the characters that I created for the series. Unfortunately, the whole endeavor proved to be a lot more work than I had time for at the time that I was making the videos, and so I gave that up after just 2 episodes. In retrospect, I probably could have eventually managed if I simply worked on the series at a much slower pace. But after putting it down for a while, it just became more and more difficult to pick up all the threads and get it going again, so the whole thing never got past the initial 2 episodes. But my growing regret at having never finished that series formed a large part of my impetus for starting this one. So I suppose there is a silver lining. For those of you who decided to skip the pursuit, welcome back. So we have a number of salvage options here. The ones most tempting to me are the Hammerhead and the Mora carrier. And we could also take a Falcon for a story point. I quite like Mora carriers, but they do have this annoying habit of running into the middle of the battle and soaking up a bunch of torpedoes. The Falcon really doesn't have this problem, but I do also want to start being a little bit frugal with our story points, so I think I'm just going to take the Hammerhead here. And as expected, that Atlas had a whole lot more cargo than we could reasonably carry, but I'm okay with leaving a bunch of metals behind as they're not too valuable. Let's make a quick stop over at Garnier since it's on the way, and then continue on to Galatia. Now that our fleet is suddenly quite a bit bigger than before, navigating through hyperspace is also getting quite a bit trickier. As a matter of personal preference, if I don't foresee a battle in the immediate future, I'll often choose to simply fly through hyperspace storms. I'm a bit of a speed demon, and I much prefer the hit to our supplies rather than try to fly through them at a speed of 3 or 4. Alright, let's finally make our way to Garnier. While we were docked, I sold off various things that we looted from the trade fleet, and I restored as many of our smaller ships as I could afford to. The rationale for that, again, being that we want the field repair skill to trigger on the conquest rather than any of the smaller ships, as repairing the capital ship just costs so much more, and I don't want to have to spend the rest of the playthrough trying to fund our repair efforts. I also rebuilt that Hammerhead that we picked up, and it actually ended up pretty similarly to our flagship. The difference being I didn't have any assault chain guns to spare, so it ended up with heavy mortars instead. And the extra ordnance points went towards Sabo missiles on the front and Vulcan cannons for point defense on the back. Alright, we finally made it to Galatia Academy again. As a reminder, we're still doing odd jobs for Alvis here until we build up enough reputation for Provost Baird to give us something more involved in whatever it is she's up to. And fortunately, Alvis has a job here that automatically gives us the neutrino detector skill, which may come in useful in the future if we're told to find something in the star system but aren't told specifically where it is. We'll just need to remember to keep some volatiles in our inventory, as the skill does require them in order to be used. And we also got a job to transport a VIP to Asharu in the Corvus star system, so that's what we'll start with in the next episode. Until then, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you out there in the sector.